So DJI just released firmware version 1.02.10.10 for the Osmo Action 3. And this firmware update is packed with a lot of new features and some fixes as well. Now, one of the biggest new features that's in this firmware update is the ability to film 10-bit footage with the Action 3 now. When the Action 3 came out back in September, you could only do 8-bit footage on it. But if you checked out my best settings video for the Action 3, I mentioned in that it was rumored that 10-bit would be coming as an option to the Action 3 later this fall. And sure enough, DJI did come through. The newest firmware update does have the ability to film 10-bit footage in certain resolutions and frame rates. But before we get into that, I do want to mention that when you run this firmware update, it will wipe out all of the custom settings that you have put into your camera. So do note that after the firmware update installs, you will have to redo all of those custom settings. And if you use those custom settings from my original video, I've linked to it above, so you can easily access it to put those in again. So let's get into what this firmware update includes so that we can talk about each of these new features and fixes that DJI has provided. So the first big thing that DJI included with this firmware update is the addition of the HDR video mode. And the thing to know about the HDR video mode is 10-bit is enabled by default in that mode. And the HDR mode is great for you if you want to film footage that you don't have to edit later on, but you still want those benefits of 10-bit. And the HDR does have a wider dynamic range. So in general, if you use that, you're gonna get a lot better footage out of your camera than if you use something like, say, the normal color mode in one of the other video modes. And DJI also has something called enhanced image quality. And that and 10-bit are enabled by default whenever you film in the HDR video mode. And here's a sample that I filmed today with the HDR video mode, and it looks really good. I like how it looks right out of the camera. That looks great for footage that I would not want to edit. Now later on, I'll show you a comparison between 8-bit footage, 10-bit D-Log footage, and then 10-bit graded footage, so you can see the difference between those three, kind of a before and after with the 10-bit. And of course, the next feature that DJI added is 10-bit video, and this is available in the D-Cinelike profile. So it's important to note that if you shoot in the normal video mode with the normal color profile, 10-bit is not enabled there. That would only be 8-bit footage. So you either have to do HDR video, which is 10-bit straight out of the camera. Like I said before, that's gonna be great if you don't want to edit that footage with any color grading or very minimal grading later on. But then the D-Cinelike profile is that flat profile, and that has 10-bit enabled in certain resolutions and frame rates. Now, I did film footage earlier in 4K 60, and it was available there, but I believe it's not available in 4K 120. 4K 120 is still 8-bit footage, so do keep that in mind. Now, DJI also states they added the enhanced image quality in the normal video mode as well, but they do note it's only available in certain frame rates and resolutions as well. I looked in the release that DJI had on their website, and they don't specify there either, but from what I can tell, it is available in 4K 60 and below, so do keep that in mind. This shot right here is with the 8-bit color. This is without the 10-bit applied, and this is the normal color profile on the Action 3. This shot right here is with the D-Cinelike with 10-bit set on it. And this, of course, is going to be flat without being color corrected. This is the clip in D-Cinelike with 10-bit selected after grading it. So this would be the maximum detail that could be gotten out of the footage. Something else neat that DJI added is the timecode. You can turn on the timecode, and this is great if you're using multiple Action 3 cameras or other cameras and you want to synchronize that footage later on. You can easily match up those timecodes. And I know several of you have expressed to me that you would like to see DJI add that back again. So apparently DJI got that feedback and they have re-added it. So you can now use timecode with your footage. DJI also added OTG, which is USB on the go. And this means you can now connect this with the cable to Android devices as well. And that's great for you to quickly offload those files to your phone if you want to edit using the DJI Mimo app or another app on your phone. Another big thing that DJI added is RockSteady Plus. So RockSteady Plus is basically RockSteady, but with even greater stabilization ability. Now do note this does introduce an additional crop into your footage versus if you use traditional RockSteady. I personally still prefer RockSteady, But if there are situations where I was running or doing something that had a lot of shakiness to the camera, then I would turn on RockSteady Plus, and that's worth the trade-off of that little bit of crop. But in general, RockSteady still works best for me. DJI also added support for 16:9 vertical display for live streaming. So you can now have your Action 3 like this filming, and you can live stream in the vertical mode. Now that's a great feature if you're using a platform like Instagram or YouTube Shorts. It's great for that. So it's nice to have that ability when you're live streaming now. You don't just have to have it in horizontal. DJI also added a new field of view option. You can now shoot in narrow mode for the field of view. So if you don't want to shoot in wide or that D-Warp standard, you can go even narrower and do the narrow view. There may be certain use cases where that's good, especially if you don't want to edit the footage later on, but you want something a little bit more cropped in. It can be a good idea to shoot in the narrow mode. DJI also added additional power options for auto power off. You can now also select 1 minute or 2 minutes as an option for the auto power off. In addition, DJI also offered an additional language for the camera system settings. Arabic has now been added. So if Arabic is your primary language, that is now available there in the menus. Now in their notes, DJI doesn't get into what particular bugs or issues they fixed with this firmware update, but I'm certain there are some in there. Probably some things that you have noticed on your Action 3 or I have noticed that we might finally see, oh, those are fixed. Now, I can't entirely comment yet on the focus issue that many of you were having with this. I don't feel like I've tested this enough after the firmware update to say for certainty that has been fixed, but I'm gonna be out there doing a lot more testing with this, and I'll release some additional footage so that you can see what the footage looks like from here now, and to see if that firmware update appears to have resolved it. But if you saw my original video with the sample footage, several of you, myself included, did notice that footage did not look as sharp, especially when there was a subject in there. It looked kind of soft. And there were some claims of an improvement on that with the prior firmware update back in October, but the footage still doesn't look as good as footage from some of the other cameras when it comes to the sharpness. So I'm curious to see how it's going to look after this firmware update. And I'll be happy to share some samples so that you guys can check it out. If you were on the fence, waiting to decide if you were going to get an Action 3 or not, that could be helpful to you. And if you currently own an Action 3, we're considering sending it back. That also might be helpful to check out.